The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Roosevelt Middle School as I carefully maneuvered my old Honda Civic into a spot near the main entrance. My arthritic hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, not from the difficulty of parking, but from the nervous energy that had been building in my chest since I woke up. Today was the day I would finally meet my grandson Marcus's teachers for the parent-teacher conferences that my daughter Angela couldn't attend due to her double shift at the hospital. At 68 years old, I had raised 5 children of my own and helped raise countless grandchildren, but stepping into Marcus's world at Roosevelt Middle School felt different somehow. Maybe it was because I knew how much he meant to me, or maybe it was because I understood the challenges he faced as a young black boy in a predominantly white school district. Either way, I wanted to make sure his teachers saw him the way I did, brilliant, kind, and full of potential. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time, adjusting the collar of my navy blue blouse and making sure my silver hair was neat beneath my favorite headscarf. The weight I had gained over the years, especially since my husband William passed 3 years ago, made me self-conscious sometimes, but today I pushed those thoughts aside. I was here for Marcus, and that was all that mattered. The schools. Red brick facade looked imposing against the gray November sky, and I could see groups of students moving between classes through the large windows. Some were laughing, others looked rushed as they hurried down the hallways with their backpacks, slung over their shoulders. It reminded me of when my own children were this age, back when schools felt more familiar to me, when I was younger and more confident navigating these institutional spaces. As I walked toward the main entrance, my orthopedic shoes clicking against the concrete, I noticed a few students gathered near the flagpole. They appeared to be on their lunch break, sitting on the low stone wall that surrounded the school's small garden area. I didn't pay them much attention at first, focused as I was on finding the right entrance and making sure I wasn't late for my first appointment with Mrs. Henderson, Marcus's English teacher. The heavy glass doors opened with a slight whoosh, and immediately I was enveloped by the familiar smells of a school cafeteria mixed with floor cleaner and the faint scent of adolescent energy that seems to permeate every middle school hallway. The main office was clearly marked with bold lettering, and I made my way over to the reception desk where a young woman with short blonde hair and kind eyes looked up from her computer screen. "Good morning, how can I help you?" she asked with a genuine smile that immediately put me at ease. "Good morning, I'm Dorothy Washington, here for parent-teacher conferences for my grandson, Marcus Washington. He's in the 7th grade. She quickly typed something into her computer and nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Washington. We have you scheduled with Mrs. Henderson at 11:30, Mr. Rodriguez at 12:15, and Principal Johnson wanted to speak with you briefly at 1 o'clock, if that works for you." "That sounds perfect, thanks you so much. Mrs. Henderson is in room 204, just up the stairs and to your right. The elevator is right over there if you prefer," she said, gesturing toward the corner of the lobby. I thanked her again and decided to take the stairs, wanting to get a feel for the school environment that Marcus navigated every day. The stairwell was clean, but showed the wear of hundreds of students passing through daily. Motivational posters lined the walls with messages like "Dream Big" and "Respect is Earned" in bright colors that seemed designed to inspire, but somehow felt generic. Room 204 was easy to find, and through the small window in the door, I could see Mrs. Henderson organizing papers at her desk. She was a woman probably in her 40s with curly red hair and glasses, and when I knocked softly, she looked up with a warm expression. "You must be Marcus's grandmother," she said as she opened the door and extended her hand. "I'm Sarah Henderson. Please, come in and have a seat." Her classroom was inviting, with student artwork displayed around the room and bookshelves lined with novels and poetry collections. I settled into the chair across from her desk, noticing a small framed photo of Marcus among other student pictures on her bulletin board. "I want to start by saying what a pleasure Marcus is to have in class," Mrs. Henderson began, and I felt my shoulders relax. "He's thoughtful, participates in discussions, and his writing shows real depth and creativity. His essay about his family history was particularly moving. "He's always been a bright boy," I replied, feeling a surge of pride. "His mother and I work hard to make sure he has everything he needs to succeed." "It shows. He talks about you often. Mrs. Washington, he clearly admires you a great deal." We spent the next 20 minutes discussing Marcus's progress, his strengths in literature analysis, and some areas where he could improve, particularly in grammar and essay structure. Mrs. Henderson was thorough and clearly cared about her students, which made me feel confident that Marcus was in good hands. "Before you go," she said as we were wrapping up, "I wanted to mention that Marcus sometimes seems a bit isolated socially. He's well liked by his classmates, but I notice he tends to keep to himself during group activities. It might be worth encouraging him to join some extracurricular activities. I'll talk to him about that. He's always been a bit shy, but once he opens up, he's got so much to offer." After thanking Mrs. Henderson, I made my way back downstairs to find Mr. Rodriguez's classroom for the next appointment. The hallways were busier now as students moved between classes, their conversations and laughter echoing off the tile floors. I felt a bit out of place among all the young energy, but I reminded myself that I belonged here as much as any parent. Mr. Rodriguez, Marcus's math teacher, was waiting for me in room 118. He was a tall Hispanic man with kind eyes and an easy smile, and his classroom walls were covered with mathematical formulas and student work. The meeting went equally well, with Mr. Rodriguez praising Marcus's analytical thinking while suggesting he needed to show more of his work on problem-solving assignments. "Marcus has real potential in mathematics," he explained, showing me some of Marcus's recent tests. "Sometimes I think he solves problems in his head so quickly that he forgets other people need to see his reasoning." "That sounds like him," I laughed. "Even as a little boy, he could figure things out faster than he could explain them." By the time I finished with Mr. Rodriguez, it was nearly 1 o'clock, and I decided to take a few minutes to use the restroom before my meeting with Principal Johnson. The student bathroom was occupied, so I asked a passing teacher where I might find a faculty restroom, and she directed me toward the end of the main hallway. As I made my way down the corridor, I passed the cafeteria where some students were still finishing their lunch. The large room was filled with the typical middle school scene: groups of friends clustered around tables, animated conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter. It reminded me of my own school days, though the demographics were quite different from the all-black school I had attended in Alabama in the 1960s. I was almost to the restroom when I heard my name being called from behind me. Turning around, I saw a tall boy with sandy brown hair jogging to catch up with me. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Washington's grandmother?" "Yes, I am. And you are?" "I'm Tyler. I sit next to Marcus in English class. He talks about you all the time." "That's sweet of you to say. It's nice to meet you, Tyler. Mrs. Henderson sent me to find you, actually. She forgot to give you this form about the upcoming field trip to the Shakespeare Theater downtown. Marcus is really excited about it." He handed me a permission slip, and I thanked him before continuing toward the restroom. It was such a small interaction, but it reinforced what I had been feeling all morning, that Marcus was in a good environment with teachers who cared and classmates who were friendly and inclusive. The restroom was clean and well-maintained, and, as I washed my hands, I looked at myself in the mirror. The morning had gone so much better than I had anticipated. Marcus was doing well academically, his teachers genuinely cared about him, and he seemed to be finding his place in this school community. I felt a sense of relief and gratitude that I hadn't expected. As I prepared to leave the restroom and head to my final meeting with Principal Johnson, I thought about how I would tell Marcus about my visit. I knew he had been nervous about me, coming to his school, worried perhaps that I might embarrass him, or that his teachers might not understand our family situation. But everything had gone smoothly, and I was looking forward to sharing the positive feedback with him. I checked the time on my phone and realized I had a few minutes before my appointment with the principal. Rather than heading directly to the office, I decided to take a short walk around the school to get a better sense of Marcus's daily environment. The hallways were mostly empty now, except for a few students at their lockers and teachers moving between classrooms. The school felt like a place where learning was valued and students were supported. The bulletin boards displayed student achievements, upcoming events, and positive messages about character and academic excellence. It was clear that Roosevelt Middle School was trying to create an environment where all students could succeed, and from what I had seen so far, they were doing a good job of it. As I made my way back toward the main office for my meeting with Principal Johnson, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This visit had confirmed what I had hoped, that Marcus was in good hands, surrounded by caring adults who saw his potential and wanted to help him succeed. All that remained was the final meeting with the principal, and then I could head home with good news to share with both Marcus and Angela. Principal Johnson's office was warm and inviting, with family photos on her desk and certificates covering the walls that spoke to her years of dedication in education. Dr. Patricia Johnson was an African-American woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and an authoritative presence that commanded respect while still feeling approachable. "Mrs. Washington, please have a seat," she said, gesturing to the comfortable chairs in front of her desk. "I wanted to meet with you personally because Marcus is such a special young man, and I know how much you mean to him. Thank you for taking the time, Dr. Johnson. I've heard wonderful things about you from both Marcus and my daughter. Marcus talks about you constantly. It's clear that you play a central role in his life, and I want you to know that we value family involvement here. At Roosevelt, your presence in his educational journey makes a real difference." We spent about 15 minutes discussing Marcus's overall progress, his social development, and some opportunities for enrichment that the school offered. Dr. Johnson mentioned a mentorship program that might be beneficial and suggested that Marcus consider running for student government, given his leadership qualities in group projects. "I also want you to know," she continued, "that we take the social-emotional well-being of our students very seriously here. If Marcus ever faces any challenges, whether academic or social, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. I appreciate that more than you know. As his grandmother, I worry about him navigating this world, especially being one of the few Black students in many of his classes. That's a valid concern and one we take seriously. We have ongoing diversity and inclusion initiatives, and we work hard to ensure all students feel valued and supported. Marcus seems to be adjusting well, but we're always monitoring and ready to intervene if needed." The meeting concluded with Dr. Johnson walking me to the door and reminding me about upcoming school events, including a family literacy night that she thought I might enjoy. I felt even more confident about Marcus's school experience after speaking with her. As I left the main office, I decided to take one more walk through the school before heading home. The lunch period was ending, and students were beginning to gather their things and prepare for afternoon classes. The energy in the building was shifting from the relaxed atmosphere of lunchtime to the more focused pace of afternoon instruction. Was walking past the large windows that overlooked the school's courtyard when I noticed a group of students congregating near the outside eating area. Since the weather was mild for November, many students had chosen to eat lunch outside, and some were still lingering in the courtyard area before their next class. Deciding to step outside for a moment to enjoy the fresh air before my drive home, I pushed open one of the heavy doors that led to the courtyard. The space was nicely landscaped, with benches arranged around small trees and garden areas, clearly designed to give students a pleasant outdoor environment during their breaks. Most of the students had already headed inside, but there was still a group of about 8 or 10 kids gathered near the far end of the courtyard. They appeared to be 7th or 8th graders, and they were engaged in animated conversation, their voices carrying across the otherwise quiet space. I wasn't particularly paying attention to them as I walked along the path that curved through the courtyard, enjoying the way the afternoon sun felt warm on my face despite the cool air. I was thinking about my successful morning and looking forward to sharing the positive reports with Marcus when he got home from school. That's when I heard the first comment, spoken loudly enough that it was clearly meant to be heard. "Look at that old whale walking around our school." I stopped walking, unsure if I had heard correctly. The group of students was about 30 feet away from me, and I turned slightly to see if they were talking about someone else. But there was no one else in the courtyard except for me and them. "Why is she even here?" Another voice called out, and this time I could see that it was coming from their direction. My heart started beating faster, and I felt a familiar tightness in my chest that I remembered from my younger days when I had faced similar situations. But this was 2024, in a school where my grandson was a student, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Probably welfare check day," one of the boys said, and several of them laughed. I stood there for a moment, frozen between the impulse to walk away and the need to address what was happening. These were children, I reminded myself. They were Marcus's age, maybe a little older, and they were behaving in a way that their parents and teachers would surely find unacceptable. I decided to continue walking toward the exit, hoping that ignoring their comments would be the most dignified response. But as I got closer to their group, the comments became more direct and more cruel. "Hey, lady, you know you're not supposed to be here without permission," called out a tall boy with blonde hair who appeared to be the ringleader of the group. "I have permission," I replied calmly, not stopping but making eye contact with him. "I just finished meeting with your principal." "Oh, great, another complaint from the ghetto," said a girl with long brown hair, and the group erupted in laughter. Felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, but I kept walking. I was almost to the door that would take me back inside the building when I heard the comment that stopped me in my tracks. "Look at that old black whale trying to waddle away. Probably here to complain that her grandson isn't getting special treatment." The word whale hit me like a physical blow. I had struggled with my weight for years, especially since William died, and I knew that my size made me an easy target for cruel comments. But combined with the racial slur and the assumption about why I was at the school, it felt particularly vicious. I turned around to face the group, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice steady. "I am a grandmother visiting this school to meet with teachers about my grandson's progress. I have every right to be here, and you have no right to speak to any adult, especially a visitor to your school, in such a disrespectful manner." "Oh, she's going to lecture us now," said the blonde boy, and several others snickered. "Your parents would be ashamed of how you're behaving," I continued, trying to keep my voice calm despite the anger building inside me. "My parents don't care what I say to people like you," replied the girl with brown hair. "People like me?" I asked, though I already knew what she meant. "You know exactly what I mean," she said with a smirk. It was at that moment that I noticed we were no longer alone, in the courtyard. During our exchange, several other students had come outside, apparently drawn by the commotion. Some looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, while others seemed curious about the confrontation. I also noticed that one of the students who had just come outside was Tyler, the boy who had approached me earlier about the field trip permission slip. He looked shocked by what he was seeing, and I could tell he was trying to decide whether to intervene. "Marcus Washington is my grandson," I said loudly enough for everyone in the courtyard to hear. "He's a student here, a good student, and he deserves better than to have his grandmother treated this way at his own school." The mention of Marcus's name seemed to have an impact on some of the students, including Tyler, who stepped forward. "Hey, cut it out, guys, that's not cool," he said to the group that had been taunting me. "Mind your own business, Tyler," the blonde boy replied. "It is my business. Marcus is my friend, and this is his grandmother." But Tyler's intervention only seemed to embolden the original group. The blonde boy, who I would later learn was named Connor, stepped closer to me. "I don't care whose grandmother you are. You don't belong here, and you look ridiculous trying to fit in where you're not wanted. Just because your grandson goes here doesn't mean you have the right to waddle around campus like you own the place," added another boy. The comments were getting worse, and I could feel tears starting to form in my eyes despite my efforts to remain composed. I had faced discrimination before, many times throughout my life, but somehow this felt different. Maybe it was because it was happening at Marcus's school, or maybe it was because these children felt so comfortable being so openly cruel. I looked around the courtyard and saw that there were now about 15 students watching the encounter. Some looked disgusted by their classmates' behavior, others appeared to be enjoying the show, and a few seemed uncertain about what they should do. Tyler stepped closer to me, as if trying to offer some protection, and I heard him say to the group, "Seriously, stop it. This isn't funny." "Tyler's got a crush on Grandma," one of the girls called out, which resulted in more laughter from the core group of tormentors. It was then that I noticed movement near the doors to the building. Several adults had appeared, including what looked like teachers and possibly administrators. They were clearly observing the situation, though they were too far away to have heard the specific comments that had been made. Connor, the blonde boy who had been leading the taunting, must have noticed the adults as well, because he looked around nervously before making one final, devastating comment. "Well, at least we got a good look at what failure looks like. Old, fat, black, and useless. No wonder her grandson probably won't amount to anything either." The courtyard fell completely silent after that comment. Even some of the students who had been laughing earlier looked shocked by how far Connor had gone. Tyler looked like he wanted to physically confront Connor, and several other students were shaking their heads in disbelief. I felt like I had been slapped. The combination of ageism, body shaming, and racism in that single sentence was more than I could bear, and, for the first time in the encounter, I felt truly hurt rather than just angry. The tears that I had been holding back began to flow, and I realized that I was shaking. But it was at that exact moment that I heard a firm, authoritative voice cutting through the tension in the courtyard. "What exactly is going on out here?" I turned to see Dr. Johnson striding across the courtyard with two other adults I didn't recognize. Her expression was stern, and it was clear that she had witnessed at least part of the encounter. The group of students who had been so confident and cruel just moments before suddenly looked like the children they were, shifting nervously and avoiding eye contact with the approaching adults. "I asked what is going on here," Dr. Johnson repeated, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed. "Nothing, Dr. Johnson," Connor mumbled. "We were just talking." "Mrs. Washington," Dr. Johnson said, approaching me with obvious concern. "Are you all right? What happened here?" I wiped the tears from my eyes and tried to compose myself. These students were making some very inappropriate comments about my appearance and my race, and about my grandson. Dr. Johnson's expression hardened, and she looked around the group of students with obvious disappointment and anger. "Is this true?" she asked the assembled students. Most of them remained silent, but Tyler stepped forward. "Yes, ma'am, it's true. Connor and his friends were saying really horrible things to Mrs. Washington. They called her names and made fun of her for being here." "Tyler, shut up," Connor hissed, but Dr. Johnson heard it. "Excuse me, Mr. Bradley. Did you just tell another student to shut up for telling the truth about your behavior?" Connor looked down at the ground and didn't respond. "I want every single student who was involved in this incident to follow me to my office immediately," Dr. Johnson announced. "And I want any student who witnessed this behavior to come with us as well. We're going to get to the bottom of this, right now." The two adults who had come out with Dr. Johnson, whom I now realized were other administrators, began organizing the students and preparing to escort them inside. The entire group looked nervous and subdued, a dramatic change from their confidence just minutes earlier. Dr. Johnson approached me with genuine concern in her eyes. "Mrs. Washington, I am so sorry this happened. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and I want you to know that there will be serious consequences for every student involved." "Thank you," I managed to say, though my voice was still shaky. "Would you mind coming back inside with us? I'd like to get a complete account of what happened, and I want these students to hear exactly what they did and understand the impact of their actions." I nodded, and as we walked back toward the building, I couldn't help but think about Marcus and how he would feel when he learned about this incident. I also thought about the profound disappointment I felt, not just in those particular students, but in the realization that even in 2024, in what I had thought was a progressive and inclusive school, this kind of behavior still existed. But I also felt a glimmer of hope in Dr. Johnson's immediate response and in students like Tyler who had tried to stand up for what was right. Maybe this incident, as painful as it was, could become a teachable moment for the entire school community. Dr. Johnson's office had been transformed from the warm, welcoming space I had visited earlier into something that felt more like a courtroom. The principal sat behind her desk with a grave expression, while her assistant principal, Mr. Davis, and the school counselor, Mrs. Martinez, flanked her on either side. The students who had been involved in the courtyard incident were arranged, in chairs facing the desk, and I was seated slightly to the side where I could see everyone clearly. Tyler sat near me, having volunteered to serve as a witness to what had happened. Several other students who had observed the encounter were also present, creating a semicircle of middle schoolers who now looked very different from the confident group that had confronted me outside. Connor, the blond boy who had led the taunting, sat with his arms crossed and his jaw set in defiance, though I could see uncertainty in his eyes. "Before we begin," Dr. Johnson announced, her voice carrying the weight of her authority, "I want everyone in this room to understand that what happened in that courtyard represents everything this school stands against. Respect, dignity, and inclusion are not just words we put on posters here at Roosevelt Middle School. They are the foundation of our community." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each of the students involved. "Mrs. Washington is not just any visitor to our school. She is the grandmother of one of our students, a woman who came here today to support her grandson's education, and a member of our school community who deserves to be treated with courtesy and respect." Connor shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but maintained his defiant posture. "Now," Dr. Johnson continued, "I want to hear from Mrs. Washington exactly what happened in that courtyard, and I want every one of you to listen carefully to understand the impact of your actions." I took a deep breath, still feeling emotional about the encounter, but determined to tell the truth about what had occurred. I had just finished my meetings with Marcus's teachers and with Dr. Johnson, and I decided to take a walk through the courtyard before leaving. I was enjoying the fresh air and thinking about what a positive morning I'd had. Several of the students looked surprised by this, perhaps not realizing that my visit had been going so well before they encountered me. "That's when I started hearing comments from this group of students," I continued, gesturing toward Connor and his friends. "At first, I thought maybe I was mistaken about what I was hearing, but the comments became more direct and more hurtful." "What specifically did they say to you?" asked Mr. Davis, the assistant principal. "They called me an old whale. They made assumptions about why I was here, suggesting I was on welfare or here to make complaints. They used racial slurs and told me I didn't belong at the school." I could see some of the students who hadn't been directly involved looking shocked by this recounting. Even a few of Connor's friends seemed uncomfortable hearing their behavior described so clearly. "The worst comment came at the end," I said, my voice getting stronger as I continued. "One student said I was old, fat, black, and useless, and suggested that my grandson probably wouldn't amount to anything either." The silence in the room was profound. Even Connor's defiant expression had softened somewhat, though he still wasn't making eye contact with anyone. Dr. Johnson let the weight of my words settle over the room before responding. "Does anyone want to dispute Mrs. Washington's account of what happened?" The students remained silent. "Tyler, you were there as a witness. Is Mrs. Washington's description accurate?" Tyler nodded earnestly. "Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what happened." Connor said all those things, and some of the others were laughing and encouraging him. "I see. And did anyone try to stop this behavior before I arrived?" "Tyler did. I interjected. He told them to stop and said it wasn't cool. He also told them that Marcus was his friend and that I was Marcus's grandmother. Dr. Johnson looked at Tyler with approval. Thank you for trying to do the right thing, Tyler. She then turned her attention back to the group of students who had been involved in the taunting. I want each of you to look at Mrs. Washington and think about what you've done. This woman came to our school to support her grandson's education. She met with teachers who had nothing but positive things to say about Marcus. She had a productive meeting with me about ways we can help Marcus continue to succeed. Connor finally looked up, and I could see that his defiance was beginning to crack. And instead of being welcomed as a member of our school community, she was subjected to racist, ageist, and body-shaming comments from students who should know better. She was reduced to tears by children who seemed to have forgotten everything. They've been taught about treating others with dignity and respect. The room remained silent, but I could see the impact of Dr. Johnson's words on the students. Some were looking down at their hands, others appeared to be fighting back tears of their own. Mrs. Martinez, the school counselor, spoke up. I want everyone to think about how you would feel if someone treated your grandmother or your mother or your aunt the way you treated Mrs. Washington today. How would that make you feel? Angry, whispered one of the girls who had been part of Connor's group. Exactly, Mrs. Martinez continued. You would be angry and hurt and disappointed. That's exactly how Marcus is going to feel when he learns about this incident. At the mention of Marcus, several students looked genuinely distressed. I realized that some of them probably knew my grandson personally and were beginning to understand the personal impact of their actions. Marcus is going to have to come to school tomorrow, knowing that his classmates treated his beloved grandmother with cruelty and disrespect, Dr. Johnson added. How do you think that's going to affect his ability to focus on his education and feel comfortable in this school community? Connor finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We didn't think about that. No, you didn't think, Dr. Johnson replied firmly. You didn't think about Mrs. Washington as a person with feelings. You didn't think about Marcus as your classmate who would be hurt by your actions. You didn't think about the values this school tries to teach. You just acted on impulse and prejudice. Mr. Davis leaned forward. What you did today wasn't just mean or inappropriate. It was a form of harassment based on race and age, and it created a hostile environment for a member of our school community. These are serious issues that have serious consequences. I could see the students beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. What had probably seemed like harmless teasing to them was being framed in terms of harassment and discrimination, and they were realizing that their actions would have real consequences. Now, Dr. Johnson continued, we need to talk about what happens next. First, I want each student who participated in this harassment to write a formal letter of apology to Mrs. Washington. Not a quick, I'm sorry, but a thoughtful reflection on what you did, why it was wrong, and how you plan to do better in the future. She paused to let this sink in before continuing. Second, all students who were directly involved in making inappropriate comments will serve a 3-day out-of-school suspension effective immediately. The impact of this announcement was immediate. Several students gasped, and I could see panic in some of their eyes as they realized the seriousness of the consequences. Dr. Johnson, Connor said, speaking up for the first time with something approaching humility in his voice, please don't suspend us. My parents will kill me. You should have thought about that before you decided to harass a visitor to our school, she replied without hesitation. Actions have consequences, Mr. Bradley, and the consequences for harassment and discrimination are severe. But we didn't mean, began one of the girls. What you meant is less important than what you did, Mr. Davis interrupted. Mrs. Washington didn't feel your intentions. She felt the impact of your words and actions, and that impact was harmful and hurtful. Mrs. Martinez addressed the group with a slightly gentler tone. This suspension isn't just punishment. It's an opportunity for you to reflect on your behavior and figure out how to make amends. You'll need to meet with me individually when you return to discuss what you've learned and how you plan to treat others differently in the future." Dr. Johnson stood up from her desk and walked around to face the students directly. "I also want you to understand that this incident will be documented in your disciplinary records, and your parents will be contacted immediately to discuss what happened and what the consequences are." The mention of parental contact seemed to have the most significant impact on the students. Several of them looked genuinely frightened at the prospect of explaining their behavior to their families. "Dr. Johnson," said a boy who had been part of the group but hadn't spoken before, "can we apologize to Mrs. Washington right now? Can we tell her we're sorry?" Dr. Johnson looked at me. "Mrs. Washington, some of these students would like to apologize to you. Are you willing to hear what they have to say?" I looked around the room at these children, who had caused me such pain just an hour earlier. They looked young and scared and genuinely remorseful, and I remembered that they were only slightly older than Marcus. Despite everything that had happened, I found myself wanting to believe that this could be a learning experience for them. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm willing to listen." The boy who had asked to apologize stood up first. "Mrs. Washington, I'm really sorry for what we did to you. It was wrong and mean, and we should have known better. I hope you can forgive us." "I was laughing when Connor said those things," admitted one of the girls, tears now flowing down her face. "I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. I'm so sorry." One by one, the students who had been involved offered their apologies. Some were more articulate than others. Some seemed more genuinely remorseful, but all of them acknowledged that their behavior had been wrong. Connor was the last to speak, and when he finally stood up, I could see that he had been crying. "Mrs. Washington, I said terrible things to you, and I'm ashamed of myself. I don't know why I did it. I know Marcus is a good guy, and you seem like a nice lady, and I had no right to treat you the way I did. I'm really, really sorry." I looked at these students, these children who had caused me such pain, and I felt something shifting in my heart. They were still children, still learning how to navigate the world and their place in it. What they had done was wrong, but their remorse seemed genuine, and their willingness to face consequences gave me hope. "I accept your apologies," I said, my voice steady now. "But I want you to understand that saying sorry isn't enough. You need to think about why you felt comfortable treating a stranger the way you treated me today. You need to examine your own attitudes and biases and work to do better." "Yes, ma'am," several of them said in unison. "And," I continued, looking directly at Connor, "you need to think about Marcus and how your actions today might affect him. He's a good boy who works hard and treats people with kindness. He doesn't deserve to suffer because of what you did to his grandmother." Connor nodded vigorously. "I'll apologize to Marcus too. I'll make sure he knows that what we did wasn't about him." Dr. Johnson returned to her seat behind the desk. "Mrs. Washington, I want you to know that this incident will serve as a learning opportunity for our entire school community. We'll be addressing issues of respect and inclusion in our upcoming assemblies and classroom discussions." "I appreciate that," I replied, "and I hope these students will become advocates for treating others with dignity and respect." "They will," she said firmly, looking around the room at the chastened group. "Won't you?" The students nodded earnestly, and I could see a genuine commitment in their eyes that gave me hope for their future growth. "Before we conclude," Dr. Johnson announced, "I want to make something very clear to everyone in this room. This type of behavior will not be tolerated at Roosevelt Middle School, ever. We will continue to monitor the situation closely, and any further incidents of harassment or discrimination will result in even more severe consequences." She turned to address the suspended students directly. "Your parents will be here within the hour to pick you up. You will not return to school until Monday, and when you do return, you will each meet with Mrs. Martinez to discuss your reflection letters and your plan for making positive changes in your behavior." As the meeting concluded and the students Filed out of the office, Tyler approached me before leaving. "Mrs. Washington, I'm really sorry about what happened. Marcus talks about you all the time, and he's going to be so upset when he finds out about this." "Thank you for standing up for what was right, Tyler. That took courage, and it means a lot. To me." "Marcus is lucky to have you as his grandmother," he said with a shy smile before hurrying to catch up with his classmates. Dr. Johnson walked me to the main entrance of the school, her expression still serious, but also conveying a sense of resolution. "Mrs. Washington, I want to personally apologize for what happened today. This is not representative of the values we try to instill in our students, and I'm grateful that you handled the situation with such grace and dignity." "Thank you for taking swift action, Dr. Johnson. Your response today showed those students that their behavior has real consequences, and I believe that's an important lesson. I'll be calling you later this week to follow up on how the students are progressing with their reflection assignments and to make sure Marcus is adjusting well after this incident." As I drove home from Roosevelt Middle School, my emotions were a complex mixture of hurt, anger, disappointment, and hope. The cruelty of those students' words still stung, but the swift and decisive response from the school administration had restored some of my faith in the institution. I thought about Marcus and how I would tell him about what had happened. I didn't want him to feel responsible or embarrassed, but I also wanted him to understand that there would always be people in the world who would judge him based on his race, and that he needed to be prepared to respond with dignity and strength. Most importantly, I wanted him to know that what those students had said about me was wrong, but that their cruelty didn't define my worth or his potential. We were part of a long tradition of African American families who had faced discrimination and overcome it through education, perseverance, and community support. A few students asked him about what happened, but mostly the day was normal. "I'm glad to hear that. I spoke with several of his teachers today to make sure they were aware of the situation and could provide extra support if needed. Marcus mentioned that Mrs. Henderson spoke with him. That was very thoughtful. We also had the parents of the suspended students come in today for conferences. I want you to know that they were all horrified by their children's behavior and committed to working with us to ensure this kind of incident doesn't happen again." How did the students seem when they returned their reflection letters? Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. Would you be willing to come in on Friday afternoon to meet with the students who were involved? They've written their letters, but I think it would be meaningful for them to read them to you in person and to have a conversation about moving forward. I considered the request carefully. Part of me wanted to put the entire incident behind us and move on, but another part of me recognized the educational value of such a meeting, both for the students involved and for the broader school community. "Yes, I think that would be appropriate. What time would work best? Would 3 o'clock on Friday work for you? We could meet in the conference room, and Mrs. Martinez will be there to help facilitate the conversation." "That sounds fine." Mrs. Washington, I also want you to know that we're planning to use this incident as a starting point for some broader conversations about respect and inclusion at Roosevelt. We'll be having assemblies and classroom discussions about treating all members of our school community with dignity. I think that's an excellent idea, Dr. Johnson. After hanging up the phone, I called Marcus to dinner and told him about Dr. Johnson's call and the planned meeting on Friday. "Do you want me to be there when they read their letters?" he asked. "What do you think? Would that be helpful, or would it make you uncomfortable?" Marcus thought about it for a moment. "I think I'd like to be there. I want to hear what they have to say, and I want them to see that I'm not ashamed of you or our family. Then we'll both be there on Friday." The rest of the week passed quietly, with Marcus reporting that school was returning to normal and that he was feeling more comfortable with the situation. Tyler had become even more of a friend, and a few other students had made efforts to include Marcus in their activities, perhaps motivated by the conversations that were happening throughout the school about the importance of inclusion and respect. Friday. Afternoon arrived, and Marcus and I walked into Roosevelt Middle School together for the second time that week, though under very different circumstances. This time, we were coming not as victims of harassment, but as participants in a restorative justice process that could help heal the harm that had been done and prevent future incidents. Dr. Johnson met us in the main office and escorted us to the conference room where the students who had been suspended were waiting with Mrs. Martinez. The atmosphere was serious, but not hostile, and I could see genuine nervousness and remorse in the faces of the young people who had caused such pain just days earlier. "Thank you both for coming," Dr. Johnson began. "This meeting is an opportunity for everyone involved to take responsibility for what happened, to make amends, and to commit to doing better in the future." Connor, the boy who had led the harassment, stood up first. His hands were shaking slightly as he unfolded a piece of paper and began to read. "Dear Mrs. Washington, I want to apologize for the terrible things I said to you on Tuesday. I called you names that were racist and mean, and I made fun of your appearance in a way that was cruel and hurtful. I know that my words made you cry, and I am ashamed of myself for causing you pain." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "I've been thinking a lot about why I acted that way, and I think it was because I was trying to show off for my friends, and because I have prejudices that I didn't even realize I had. That's not an excuse for what I did, but I want you to know that I'm committed to examining my attitudes and doing better." He looked up from his letter and made eye contact with me for the first time. "I also want to apologize to Marcus. I know. He's a good person, and what I said about him was wrong. I hope someday you both can forgive me." Connor sat down, and one by one, the other students stood to read their letters. Each apology was thoughtful and specific, acknowledging not just what they had done, but why it was wrong and how they planned to change their behavior in the future. When all the letters had been read, Mrs. Martinez facilitated a discussion about the impact of the incident and how everyone could move forward constructively. The students asked thoughtful questions about racism and discrimination, and Marcus spoke eloquently about his experiences as one of the few Black students at Roosevelt. "I want you all to know," Marcus said toward the end of the meeting, "that my grandmother is one of the strongest, kindest, smartest people I know. She raised 5 children and helped raise 10 grandchildren. She volunteers at our church and in our community. She deserves respect, and so does every other person who walks through the doors of this school." By the time the meeting concluded, I felt genuinely hopeful that these students had learned something meaningful from their experience. More importantly, I felt proud of Marcus for his maturity and his willingness to engage in this difficult conversation with grace and wisdom. If this story already moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave your like so you don't miss any of our stories. As we left the school that afternoon, Marcus and I walked side by side toward the parking lot, both of us feeling like something important had been accomplished. The incident that had begun with such pain and anger had been transformed into an opportunity for learning, growth, and community building. "Grandma," Marcus said as we reached the car, "I'm proud of how you handled all of this. You showed those kids what dignity looks like, even when people are treating you badly. And I'm proud of you, baby, for how you've handled yourself this week. You could have been angry or embarrassed, but instead, you've been mature and thoughtful and kind. Do you think things will really be different now?" "I think some things will be different, yes. Those students learned something important about the impact of their words and actions. But more importantly, I think this whole experience reminded everyone at Roosevelt Middle School about the importance of treating each other with respect and dignity." As we drove home, I reflected on the week's events and what they meant for Marcus's future at Roosevelt Middle School and beyond. The incident had been painful, but it had also revealed the strength of our family bonds, the power of standing up for what's right, and the possibility for growth and change even in difficult circumstances. Marcus would continue to face challenges because of his race, just as I had, and just as generations of our family had before us. but he would face those challenges with the knowledge that he was loved, supported, and capable of responding with dignity and strength. He had learned that there were people willing to stand up for him, systems in place to protect him, and opportunities to turn even painful experiences into teachable moments. Most importantly, he had learned that his worth wasn't determined by the ignorance or cruelty of others, but by his own character, his family's love, and his community's support. That was a lesson that would serve him well not just in middle school, but throughout his life. The incident at Roosevelt Middle School had ended not with bitterness or division, but with understanding, growth, and hope for a more inclusive future. It was a reminder that even in moments of darkness, there was always the possibility for light to emerge, and that sometimes the most painful experiences could become the foundation for the most meaningful change.